We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
We come live as we report that we are seeing computers globally experiencing the blue screen of death. Essentially what happens is your screen freezes up and it gives you a bad smiley face. Not a smiley face, a frown face, saying that something really bad has happened and your computer cannot continue. And if you try to reboot, ends up the same thing. So in this episode, which was an urgent release, we peel away the problems and identify what's happening with this new blue screen phenomenon.
Welcome back to Security Lab Podcast, Season 4.
Hello and welcome to Security Law. This is Doc bringing you an urgent update on the global blue screen of death issue. It's been touted so badly that people are even suggesting that July 19 should be the International Blue Screen Day. No, it's not official yet, but I'm sure someone will make it official in due time. So, what's happening with computers globally? We're hearing reports of airports being down, airlines unable to process flights. Some of the flights are getting cancelled. Airports are getting congested. We're seeing payments being down. Literally, almost all industries are being affected by this computer glitch, for a lack of a better word. So let's look through what's happening. Now, this glitch is a blue screen of death, meaning that it affects the Windows platform. So any Windows platform that has a Crowdstrike software installed in it is supposedly to have or experience this problem. Now, this problem, as of today, is only limited to Windows machine running Crowdstrike software. So if you're not running Crowdstrike software, or if you're not running Windows, but you're still running Crowdstrike, your machine will still work as it is. Example, if you're running Linux and you have Crowdstrike client, your machine is fine. If you're having, say, BSD or macOS, having Crowdstrike, you're fine. So in order for this blue screen of death to appear on your machine, it has to fulfill these two mandatory requirements. Number one, running on the Windows machine, and number two, having a Crowdstrike client. That said, it seems to only affect the more later Windows client, Windows 10 and Windows 11. We do get report that some of the older versions of Windows is not affected at this point of time. So let's look through what the problem is about. Now, based on the report that we are seeing from CrowdStrike, they claim that a channel update file that was recently released on Friday had caused the problem. So this file is loaded automatically because CrowdStrike is a cloud-based solution. It checks the updates from the cloud, and it downloads the so-called channel update file into your machine automatically. So there is no manual intervention as far as updating these files. It's just automatically downloaded to your machine. And lo and behold, someone in CrowdStrike released the file, and the file got downloaded into everybody's machine and started causing the blue screen of death. What is the trigger point of this blue screen? So the first one is the channel update file, which was downloaded. And there is a file called csagent.sys, which is a kernel mode driver. Now, kernel mode drivers are special files that runs as part of the operating system. So if you know operating system basics, your operating system is divided into two modes of running, your kernel mode and your user mode. So in kernel mode, it runs as the operating system with all the high-level privileges, whereas most of your normal applications tend to run on user mode, which has a limited set of capabilities which it can do. So an application running on user mode will not be able to affect your system that badly, but a driver that's either malicious or poorly written will cause problems when it's running at the operating system. So in this case, the Crowdstrike solution uses csagent.sys, which is a kernel mode driver, which loads this channel file driver, which causes corruption. So although this affects all Microsoft Windows-based machine, this is really not a Microsoft issue per se. But if you ask me, there are certain lessons learned that Microsoft can look at in current as well as future operating system design. These designs are already adopted in some of the other operating systems, like for example, in OpenBSD, for example, you cannot load a kernel mode or kernel level drivers or files. Mac OS uses kernel extension or KEXT files. So you have different operating system using different type of mechanisms for it to be able to run a code in a privilege mode. So since we're talking about this bug affecting globally, now who is affected? Let's look at Singapore, for example. Changi Airport had been affected by this bug. In Malaysia, we have KTMB, which is the railway transportation provider. I believe AirAsia is also affected. In India, we see Indigo and Air India making public statements as they are also affected. Now, Microsoft in its recent release mentioned that it estimates about 8.5 million machines globally are affected. Now, that's about 1%, which is kind of surprising to know that not so well-known company like CrowdStrike actually has such a huge install base, and a minor issue could actually trigger a global catastrophe. Now, interestingly, while we're talking about CrowdStrike being down, apparently Azure was also down. The storage in central US affecting products like Entra ID, GitHub Actions is also done. Whether they are related, I have no idea. Maybe, maybe not, maybe just two separate incidents that just happen to happen at the same time, right? Now, I'd like to have a special mention about a particular organization that wasn't affected, which was Southwest Airlines. Now, the interesting thing about why they were not affected is because they are still using Windows 3.11. OMG. The last time I saw Windows 3.11 was about 20 years ago. And that's, wow, very long time. Well, that's not really a good lesson to learn, because please don't keep outdated machines. You're more likely to get into other kind of problems. Maybe not this one, but also other kind of problems. You might say, yeah, so I have this issue of a machine getting blue screen. Now, why can't I just reboot it or do something to solve the problem? Now, here's the issue. This is a problem that affects the operating system. So as a result, the operating system cannot boot completely. Now, if you're one of those organizations that have moved into, IT service management in the cloud, or you have your support guys sitting in some other part of the world, tough luck. It's not going to work. So in order for you to fix this machine, first you must boot it, and you need to attend to it manually, which means that you have to be hands-on keyboard, going into safe mode, and following a few steps that you need to do. So you need actual engineers, hands-on keyboard, doing the work. So if you have outsourced your IT service management elsewhere, you're going to have a lot of problem, because if you have a large organization, say thousands of machines, you have to attend to each machine one by one. Otherwise, you're not going to solve the problem. Now, if you think that's bad, imagine if you're running a whole disk encryption solution. Now, whole disk encryption are technology where the whole hard disk is encrypted. You need to have a special password in order for you to decrypt the hard drive, and for you to be able to access files and applications inside the hard drive. So here's the thing. a lot of Microsoft-based organizations tend to use a Microsoft supplied solution called BitLocker. Now, you also have other solutions from other vendors who does hold this encryption. So now that you're in front of the keyboard, and since you're interrupting your normal booting, guess what? You now need this password. So which means you must have hands-on keys, and you must also now be able to recover your, in this case, BitLocker keys. Now, let's hope, pray that the machine that's securing your BitLocker keys isn't having the same problem. So then you have another problem. You have to recover the machine that has your BitLocker keys in order for you to recover your other machines. Yes, security is important, but, thinking a little bit of BCP is a little more difficult. So now you have a problem where you have to get hands-on keys, and you also have to get the decryption keys. So now once you get to the machine, you've decrypted your volume, you're in. So you have to find this file called C-00000029 anything after that, or ***sys. You have to delete the file, reboot. Your machine should work naturally. Now, another way is for you to be able to boot into safe mode with networking. That has also been reported to be able to solve that problem. Now, here's the thing. The file is .sys, which means that technically most people assume it's a driver file, right? It's not a driver file. According to Crowdstrike, it's like an update file. It has an update. So what does this update have? A few people who have reversed the update have identified that it has code to look into name pipes. So what has name pipes got to do with Crowdstrike? In a recent release of a tool that's globally used for red teaming, they introduced a capability called name pipes. So my guess, and the guess of most people, is that this update has been released to cater to that new red tool functionality. Now, that said, just as I'm recording this podcast, Microsoft has released a support tool or a recovery tool that you need a USB thumb drive with a minimum of 1 gig space. If your volume is encrypted with BitLocker, you also need the BitLocker key. You can boot the machine with the USB thumb drive. Now, if your machine also has a BIOS password, then you'll also need a BIOS password in order for you to enable your boot sequence and boot up from your thumb drive, and then run the thumb drive. It will clear the file and your machine will be back to normal. Now, let's deep dive into what this channel file is. Now, if you notice earlier, I mentioned about the csagent.sys, which is the kernel mode file. And Crowdstrike straight, this is a channel update file. So essentially, if you trace through the steps of what's happening, the csagent.sys is actually loading this channel update file. There's a pointer that points into the channel update file, and it's loading this file. Now, I'm not an expert in reverse engineering or kernel mode, so I'm going to refer to Travis Ormandy and Patrick Waddell. Travis is with Google. He's working on vulnerabilities, while Patrick is an expert on Apple Mac OS. I believe he's with Objective-C, an organization that I get most of my Mac OS tools. Now, Travis explains that while the common theory is that the null dereferencing can have similar effect, in this actually scenario, that's not the actual case. A lot of people are saying that, this is because you're dereferencing a null pointer, which is why you're getting a kernel panic. Well, if you look at it within the binary, the disassembled code, you will actually see that in the further part of that particular code blob, there is actually a test statement, test R8, where either you return R8 or jump if it's 0. So in this instance, this code is actually testing to make sure there is no null. This code reads the value from the table in a loop. So theoretically, it's possible that some of the values in the table may be invalid. Now, Patrick, when he disassembled the code, he saw a different value, which seems to indicate that it's potentially an uninitialized data, which may be the reason why this particular bug wasn't caught in testing. So the bug may actually be more complex than just a simple null byte dereference issue. Now, as I was reading more on this topic, a good friend of mine, Scott Hanselman, who's been in Microsoft for ages, he had something to say. Here's the thing, folks. I've been coding for 32 years, and that's referring to Scott himself. When something like this happens, it's an organizational failure. Yes, some human wrote a bad line. Someone can put a Git blame and point it to a human, and it's awful. But it's the testing of the CI/CD, the A/B testing, metered rollouts, and a oh shit button to roll it back, the code coverage, the static analysis tools, the code reviews, the organizational health, and on and on and on and on. So you have so many layers of checks. It's always the one line of code, but it's never one person implying inclusion policies that a bug is simplistic, reductive, and racist. My God, I don't know how racist came about into this whole thing. Engineering is a team sport. Inclusion makes for a good team. Good engineering practices makes for good software. Engineering practices fail to find a bug multiple times, regardless of seniority of the human who checked that code. Solving the larger system thinking SDLC matters more than the null pointer check. SDLC refers to software development lifecycle. This isn't a get good C++ is hard issue, and it's damn well isn't a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion one. So a lot to unpack in this statement where, it's some of these bugs are really hard, and it's not something where you can have 100% coverage of all the bugs that you write, that you test, right? And of course, with this issue coming on, there are other glaring issues that's popping up, or questions that's popping up in my head. Was there sufficient testing? Did someone actually do it thoroughly? Well, like what Scott mentioned earlier, maybe not possible for you to test every single scenarios. Then the question is, what was missing? The bigger issue I had in my head was, why did the rollout happen on a Friday? There's even a paper that's titled "Don't Program on Fridays: How to Locate Fix-Inducing Changes" by Jacek Sliversky, Thomas Zimmerman, and Andrea Zeller from the Department of Computer Science, Saarland University, Germany. It clearly states, folks, do not ever deploy on Friday, right? You're just asking for a seppuku and harakiri. So don't do that, right? Files are supposed to be not drivers with sys extension. Now, you say it's not a driver, it's a channel update file. So why .sys? That came up with the theory of, it's most likely a driver and not something else. But of course, as we examine the assembly code, we can see that it's actually loading the file. So whatever code that has been placed in that .sys file is loaded as a kernel mode code.
Enjoying the show so far? Subscribe now so that you don't miss out on the latest episode. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many other platforms. Visit podcast.securityla.asia to get the links to subscribe.
Right? Fault tolerance, fault recovery, or tolerance not built in either to the OS or the app. Now, here's a funny thing. I remember a time when Windows was able to block a driver or kill or isolate a driver if it goes into blue screen a couple of times. I can't remember when exactly, because I've been using Microsoft DOS version 2. So it's been a long time, but I remember Windows was able to do that. It's surprising that in this case, well, Microsoft wasn't able to have any sort of fault tolerance or fault recovery. And I know the same thing goes to CrowdStrike. Hello, you issued the channel update file. You're telling me that if it doesn't load or if there's some bug in it, your software will just die a horrible death, spit out rainbows and die? Well, yes. You're a security software. You hook into the kernel. You're running in privilege mode and you don't have this in place. I'm not very sure. Right? Now, the other thing that we're talking about is security software has hooks too deep into the operating system. Now, if I mentioned earlier is that you have operating systems now that does not allow software, irrespective of whether you're security software, whatever software, for you to be able to, go in and really muck up your operating system. Now, that's a big problem. Now, as I mentioned earlier, not being able to disable a faulty update. I guess something that's not just a Crowdstrike issue, but it's something that everyone in the security industry or software industry as a whole should be looking at. CIOs, how is your IT support outsourcing going on? Well, if you look at the interesting thing is that if you look at organization that has gone through a ransomware experience, they fared better in this situation because they had hands on keyboards. They were able to say, okay, I need to recover. I know something is wrong. Let me do something about it. They were able to bring back client machines up to speed. So it's not just about, you outsource and you want to reduce the number of headcounts, you want to reduce the number of people on site. But reality of IT support is that you need people on site. You probably have 1 or 2% on a good day, but when something hits the fan, which is not very pleasantly smelling, you may want to reconsider that approach. Because if you're going to suddenly just size up to about 500 people out of nowhere just to do IT support for you, well, sorry to say that's not going to happen overnight. And that's something that you may need to do in these kind of scenarios. Single vendor approach or over-reliance on vendor. Now, I've known some organizations that interestingly disbanded their security team because they suddenly have this solution that says, it downloads the update from the cloud, can manage itself. So I've seen CXOs or CISOs making decisions to say, I don't need a security team anymore. I have this EDR or this software that magically solves world famine. And I don't need people now. Guess what? Now you're going to suddenly realize that you actually need a team, a security team, right? A global update without internal verification that allowed a faulty update to grow through directly. Well, congratulations. That's the benefit of you using a cloud-based service. You also have vendors who have on-prem, on-site rolling out. Now, it's a catch-22 situation. You have latest bleeding edge updates, which needs to be rolled out immediately in order for your organization to be protected. On the other hand, you have issues where you have to check, you have to test, you have to verify. Now, this issue or this category of issue is not something that's unique to CrowdStrike. Literally every single software vendor has gone through one or multiple times on these kind of issues. So it's not just, it's a security software problem. No, it's a software or it's a technology problem, which, literally everyone is depending on the vendors to provide you with something that's stable, that runs without you even thinking about it, right? Now, has these kind of things happened before? If you look at it in 2010, McAfee had similar problems which affected Windows XP globally, right? I don't have much detail about this, but I'm sure you'll be able to Google and find out more details about this particular issue. And as I mentioned earlier, folks in Linux were saying, just for you guys to know, we had the same love before, so you can hold my bubble tea, because just not too long ago, in April, a CrowdStrike update caused all Debian Linux servers crashed simultaneously and refused to reboot. The update that they provided was proved to be incompatible with the latest version of Debian, despite specific Linux configuration being supported. So they discovered that removing the CrowdStrike software allowed the machines to boot normally, and report the incident. Now, a team member who was involved in that exercise was mentioning that they were very unhappy with CrowdStrike's delayed response. In fact, it took them weeks to provide a root cause analysis after acknowledging the issue a day after. So the analysis revealed that the Debian Linux configuration was not included in their test matrix. So, naughty, CrowdStrike. What's going on? Something is wrong with your whole development cycle. So, CrowdStrike's model, as the person said, seems to be we push software into your machines at any time we want, whether it's urgent or not urgent, without testing it. And this was a comment that was given by a team member who was affected by the Linux issue. So, while the good guys, well, I say good guys because we're the guys supposed to catch hackers, are having problem, the bad guys have not been keeping quiet. So what have they been doing? The first thing we noticed was that they started registering domain names to have phishing campaigns. So for example, I got 3 domain names with me: CrowdStrikeBugFixPro.com, BSODCrowdstrike.com, CrowdStrikeBlueFix.com. And as of 20th July, we see over 141 digital certificates that has been issued to a lookalike domains, trying to capitalize on the CrowdStrike issue. So we've gone through the technical analysis. We have gone through a deep dive into some parts of assembly. Now let's look at CrowdStrike as an organization. Those are some very interesting points, and make whatever theory you want out of this information. I leave it to your judgment. Let's start with the CEO, George Kurtz. Now, he's a well-known doyen in the industry. He's gone through Foundstone, McAfee, and now CrowdStrike. Now, the interesting thing about his experience in McAfee is that he was the CTO when McAfee had the same problem during the WinXP. That ended up with McAfee losing a lot of money and being sold to Intel. Lessons learned? Or maybe a jump from the CTO to CEO, you may have lost your lessons because you've now look at other things. Now, from the corporate perspective, investing.com reported that insiders have been selling since about 2 weeks ago. Henry sold a Class A of 4,000 shares. Dennis O'Leary sells 2 million shares. Roxanne Austin sold 1.9 million shares. Now, these are directors of the organization, so not sure what to make it, or it's just blind timing luck. Now, interestingly, CrowdStrike is also part of the Global Cyber Alliance, which is an initiative led by the World Economic Forum. Dun, dun, dun. It doesn't stop there. Now, CrowdStrike became famous because they were also implicating Russia in the previous RNC hack. Now, CrowdStrike eventually admitted that there were data exfiltrated, but there was no proof that it was done by the Russians. So, well, we know that the election is nearby and everything is heating up. So, well, I guess CrowdStrike is also on the crosshair. Now, another fact about CrowdStrike. These are the 4 key owners of CrowdStrike. BlackRock, 16.13 million. Vanguard Group, 16.06 million. Morgan Stanley, 5.79 million. Jennison Associates LLC, 5.09 million. CrowdStrike shares fell 17.95% down to 304.96 on a 5-day average. Interestingly, for a relatively unknown $83 billion company, affecting 1% of Microsoft globally installed machines. So, another set of facts which, a lot of us need to unpack on what's happening to the organization. Now, the final part of this podcast is that I'm very sure some of you who are lucky enough to listen to this in the morning may have to brief your senior management and may have to come up with a report, or may have to answer a whole lot of questions to your senior management or your board of directors. So I've taken the liberty, because I have extensive experience dealing with bot, and I literally could guess what their questions should be. So I've prepared 12 questions of what would most likely your senior management or your board member will ask. So if they say, no, I don't believe you guys are internal, you're just giving me unsubstantiated facts, you can play this podcast to them and let them listen through the question and answers. And, feel free to shoot us your questions if you have any after this, or if you need further information, drop us a note to our email address, info@securitylaw.asia, and we are happy to attend to it. So let's go into the BOD senior management questions. Number 1, what happened? Crowdstrike released an update and pushed it automatically to all Microsoft Windows platform. And as a result, it caused a blue screen, which renders the machine unusable. So when you see the blue screen, you can't use it, you reboot it, you still can't use it. Why did it happen? The technical details is that the update file contained a set of codes which triggered a panic at the operating system level. And because this software runs at the operating system level, it cannot recover. So the operating system needs to boot completely in order for you to be able to use the machine. If that process of booting doesn't complete, in this case, which is caused by Crowdstrike, you can't use your machine. Why were we affected? You will be affected if you're running on Windows platform together with the Crowdstrike software. If you're not running Windows platform, or if you're running Windows platform with other security software, you will not be affected. What can we do about it? There is a manual fix into solving this problem, but you need to get the machines in, have an engineer to attend to it in order for the faulty file to be removed so that the machine can work again. What can we do about it? Well, this is one of those situations where you have an update that's coming automatically from the cloud, because this is a cloud-based application. Your whole management of this platform, this CrowdStrike platform, is in cloud, and it's an update that's sent globally to everyone. It's not like in some softwares where you can have a staging area, test the software, and deploy it after you finish your testing. So this is one of those softwares where it gets an update directly. And, as of now, CrowdStrike is the only organization that can control this update. There is no facility for you to have this in a staging environment for you to test these updates. Can we sue CrowdStrike for damages? You're not alone. AirAsia CEO also said the same thing. Now, I would refer you back to your terms of service or terms of use to that software. And chances are, I don't think you can do that. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But the best person to advise you on this matter would be your lawyers. So they need to look through the software agreements. Can I take my vendor who's deploying this software to court? You can, but they are merely resellers or people who provide services. I think at best they could do is help you with the recovery process, but legally, I don't think they are liable. I'm not a lawyer. So please check with your legal counsel or your lawyers on what you can legally do with this. Does our cyber policy cover these kind of incidents? Well, it should, technically, depending on what the coverage of the policy is. So you will need to, again, go through your policy, look at what are the issues that is covered under your policy. Maybe it's not even a cyber policy. Maybe it's an operations policy that you can look at. Say if operations is affected due to an issue that is not entirely yours, then you could probably claim. Next question. Why isn't there BCP? Why didn't BCP work? Well, you see that software that you install, CrowdStrike? You've installed it in all your Windows machine, including your BCP machine. Why do you do that? Why is it a single software? It comes back to ka-ching, ringgit, dollars and cents. Instead of investing in two or multiple separate solutions, you are looking at a single solution, single vendor concept, low cost of ownership. So financially, you have this issue. But of course, this will open up to bigger discussions of how are you going to do BCP? Well, there are many points that you can look at this incident and tailor your BCP approach. Number one, do you want all your machines to be on Windows? Maybe not. Or you want all your machines to have the same kind of security software, since it hooks so deeply into the operating system that, it becomes a critical piece of software in order for you to run operations. So, next question. How long will it take for us to recover affected machines? Based on my manual testing in the lab, we clocked about anywhere between 5 to 15 minutes. Now, that's per machine, per person. So that depends on whether, number one, you have a software like BitLocker or whole disk encryption protecting the hard drive. Then you need to have another person doing the recovery keys, getting the recovery keys, and doing that. So that process may take longer depending on how complex your organization is configured. Can't we fix the problem remotely? Unfortunately, you can't. The reason being is because your operating system can't load. As a result, your remote software, support software like TeamViewer or Rust Desk or any other remote support softwares can't load. So as a result, this is one of those things where you will have to have hands-on keyboard, physical people doing physical work. Should we replace Crowdstrike? I'm very sure your internal organization, your internal teams would have tested, identified that this would be your most appropriate solution based on given the nature of your business and how things are. That said, it's really a business decision. Now, if you ask me for my professional opinion, I still feel Crowdstrike is one of the better solutions. This problem is not just isolated to Crowdstrike, but can happen to any of your security vendors. It's not just unique to Crowdstrike. This is a software development issue, which means anyone who does software development, be it internally, which may even be your own developers, as well as anyone else supplying any kind of software, may or will go through these kind of instances. You will have, whether it's a small organization or large organizations, right? They may or eventually go through these kind of issues. And what's important is how the organization or your organization is being supported throughout these trying times, because very sure a lot of other organizations who's using the same kind of technology stack going through the same issues. The next favorite question I have most likely from senior management: is this the fault of an internal team? If so, which team? Which C-level? Whose head should I put on the chopping block and whose head should I roll? Unfortunately, I regret to inform you, no heads can roll for this. That's because this is not an internal issue. It's purely an issue that's caused by one of your vendors, which is Crowdstrike. So if you're going to say, yeah, you security fellas, you guys didn't do your job, well, that's not exactly true, because this is something that's out of their realm. Now, if you look at this problem holistically, there may be other softwares that's running in your environment that can cause similar issues. It can even be as simple as an audio driver, a driver that connects your machine to a microphone that can cause such an issue. There's a whole lot of possibilities as to what or which driver can trigger blue screen. So, is it the fault of an internal team? No. Is it the fault of the security team because it's a security software and they're rolling out? Sorry to say, it's not their fault. Does this only affect security software? Obviously not. Security software is just one of the software that uses privilege mode for it to be able to do its work. Otherwise, well, the effectiveness of having this solution, a security solution, to actually be able to cover your organization or the computing or your IT or your tech stack may not be that effective. That said, there's a lot of areas to improve, both from Crowdstrike, security vendors, as well as operating system vendors, to look at this problem in a holistic manner. So, I'm sorry, unfortunately, this was released as an urgent update. So my team, the Security Law team, wasn't able to join me. They really wanted to come, but they had an urgent engagement. But I'm very sure in the next episode, you will hear from the rest of us. So if you need any help or assistance, reach out and we'll do our best to assist you in whichever manner possible. We hope that this episode has given you some insights into the problem. Do note, we just don't release urgent security updates on the podcast, but we also look at a lot of other topics that you may interest. So allow me this short opportunity for you to be able to promote the podcast to you. We are Security Law and we are available in most of the common platforms. Do drop in, give a listen, and hopefully this episode has given you some insight, has helped you either in your career as well as for your senior management to have better understanding on this topic and being able to resolve and move forward in an effective and positive manner. That's it. This is Doc signing out. Thank you and have a good day.
Thanks for joining us this week on Security Lab. Make sure to visit our website at securitylab.asia, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show.